Okay, we are still in January. So I'm counting this as a win. I was fully expecting for me to not do this until February, because it's taken me ages to set up this office. But here we are. This is my top 10 of 2021. So 2021 was the year that I really started reading, or at least the end of 2020 was. So I was really excited for 2021, a whole year of lots of reading. It is the most I've read in any year. I think I finished up about 56 books. Really proud, really happy, and it's been an absolute joy. And I really can't wait to share these books with you and to actually sit and talk about them, because I did not talk about any books last year. So that's why I'm starting up again. I'm recording because I'm excited and I want to talk about books. Number 10, Scoff. There might be a little bit of recency bias in this because I think this was like the last book that I read in the year, read it through December. And December was quite a good year for it, I think, because there's a lot of references to like Christmas traditions, which was nice. Scoff is basically discussions about food and food history in Britain, and usually how that fits in with class. So many interesting things. This is completely my jam. It's like someone wrote a non-fiction book for me. I love my interest in food. I love my weird history. And I like getting a little bit of interesting hits at classism in there. You know, and I really like any book that shifts your perspective on things. For example, I couldn't get over the fact that we could have been eating mac and cheese in the 1300s. But here in England, we wouldn't really have gotten into potatoes until like last century, as in the 1900s. What? Like, you know that the potatoes were brought to England at some point, but I didn't realise it was such a fight for us to have them. Although I am in the north, and apparently us northerners were well on board with potatoes, or at least more than the southerners. The southerners had a bit of a thing about it because the Irish had it, and English are known for being massive racists. Yeah, there's loads of great stuff in this. And if you really like your Jane Austen and Dickens and classics, there's some mentions of like how food is mentioned in those, because obviously those are useful references. This video will be really long if I just talk about this one book. Yeah, it's quite chunky, but it never felt like a drag. It was nice little mini chunks of information. Quite amusing a lot of the time, as hopefully I've shown you. So yeah, that is Scoff by Pen Vogler. Number 9, Invisible Women. Yep, 2 non-fiction, right out of the gate. This book is depressing. I just have to say that. But it's important, and I honestly wish I could force everyone I know and every politician in the world to sit down and read this. It is fascinating. You know, there's... I'll run through some things at the back to give you an idea of what this is. Imagine a world where your phone is too big for your hand. Your doctor prescribes a drug that is wrong for your body. In a car accident, you are 47% more likely to be seriously injured. That sounds familiar. Chances are that you're a woman. So I think one reason why I in particular had a lot of interest in this is that I really like my tech, And for a while, I actually worked at an app company, a place that made transport apps. So I was hanging around with a lot of techie guys, emphasis on the guys. And I also came across a lot of stories that amused me and horrified me. My go-to story was when the Apple Watch first came out. And there was this big push of, you can monitor your heart rate, your blood thing, your blah, 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 blah. Oh, it tracks everything. They did not run this by any women, I'm guessing, because we all sat there and went, can you track your period with it? Oh no. No. Like, it's in there now, but oh my god, any woman who is, especially once not on the pill, you track your period. You keep an eye on that shit. It's one of the things that I have on my phone for ages because it reminds you of when it's coming up, and it's such a simple thing. And they just... And there's loads of examples. As you can see, I've tabbed things that I found intriguing. And a lot of things come back to how caregiving roles are put on women in a lot of times, and how that is ignored in ways you wouldn't think of at first. So the first thing I bookmarked was about, where was it? Yes, so a town in Sweden. So they had a focus on, when it snows, we want to clear the roads first, let the cars go, that's safer. But I think they actually put the time into study, if I'm remembering this right, I'm not going to read the whole thing right now. But they kind of did a study that actually a lot of the people in the area were women with prams or who didn't have their own transport, who needed to get the bus. And so they actually prioritised pathways and public areas. And this had a boost on the economy. So I think that's the key point with a lot of this stuff, is by looking out for the people in the community, by checking up on the women that have been ignored all this time, it actually helps the country and the economy. Who knew?
Hi, Editing Emma here. So one thing I didn't get to mention is that the book definitely has a focus on straight cis women, or at least cis women in straight relationships when relationships are mentioned. Obviously there's going to be all sorts of categories of people brought under the stats of women, but the book doesn't really delve into trans lives or LGBTQ relationships very much, so that's maybe just something to be aware of going in. I kind of wish there maybe was a chapter about that, or even mentioned a little bit more. So sadly that's not the focus, and we can't really lay all the blame on the writer, because a lot of the times the stats completely ignore things like that and want to put people in the binary. So just something to be aware of.
So yeah, it's really fascinating. I really think I will come back to this and reference it quite a lot. I really think everyone should have this on their bookshelf. It's essential reading. Highly recommend it. Number 8, Priory of the Orange Tree. It's so pretty. I'm so glad that a book that is this pretty ended up being one of my favourites of the year. So this book is sort of split in two. So you kind of have two main characters in different parts of the world where they have different cultures, different things going on, but you will see as time goes on, these things are actually related. The world building in this is really fascinating. There's a lot of things put in there, but I really appreciate the focus on women in this story. That one of the quotes on it somewhere, I think, is oh, there we go. It's a feminist Lord of the Rings, and I think I read that when I first read that. I went, what? Just, you mean Lord of the Rings with women? But I can kind of see what they mean. There is a simple fantasy plot line in the sense of we must defeat the Dark One. It doesn't feel like that a lot of the time when you're reading it, because there's all of these other things going on, and some like politics and romance as well. But I think just having a lot of women in really important roles in the book just felt really great, because it still doesn't happen that often when you're reading fantasy. And as a bonus, there is a sapphic romance, which I didn't know going in, and was a lovely surprise. Yeah, I loved those two. They were such a great couple. There's a lot of thought and care into the prose. I really noticed, I think, because I was switching back into between this and another book that I really did not like. So every time I opened the page and just read a few sentences, it was just like, breath of fresh air is a cliche, but it really was that feeling. It's like, oh yes, I'm being dragged into this beautiful writing. And I'm normally more of a character story person. As will come up later in this video, as long as I'm pulled into the story, I don't mind simple prose, I'm fine with that. But in this, it really added to it by a lot. What else do I say? It's one of those where it's so dense, and there is a lot to it where it's hard to discuss. So I think I've covered it. I've seen some people falter with it, but it basically falls down to, if you like your chunky fantasies and you're in the mood for one with a lot of female characters in it, this is the one. Number 7, Dune. So there's quite a lot of surprises on this list. I think if I went back in time and shared this list with me from a year and a half ago, I would be like, really? Are you sure? Because I'm not really a sci-fi person. I can have it in bits. But maybe I am becoming a sci-fi person. I feel like as I get older, there's things that I appreciate, so maybe that's why. But I never saw myself as a sci-fi person, especially one that has like military stuff in. I don't really care about fights on planets in space. And even through all the while reading it, I was like, I can appreciate the story. This is quite cool. I'm getting into it more than I thought I would. But it's not my thing. It's just not for me. So how did I go from that to it being in the middle of my top 10? Well, when I was finished, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I think it did help that the film came out. I just had questions and things that I wanted to know about the world. And I think that's it. I think the worlds that Frank Herbert's built, it really started to fascinate me, and I wanted to know more. Like, I've been meaning to go back to the appendices and read things. I never read appendices. Once I'm done reading, I am done. I think the only other exception was bits of Lord of the Rings, but I don't sit and read the whole thing. If I'm curious, I'll go in bit by bit, and then I'll be like, oh, did you know that so-and-so married so-and-so? Isn't this interesting? Oh. But I was like, well, weirdly, Dune doesn't explain the spice very much. So what is going on with the spice? You could say that's a failing of the book, because the book just says spice is important, but doesn't really explain it that much in this one. Or maybe it's a good thing, because I want to keep reading to know what the deal is. And yeah, bit by bit, the world is uncovered to you. Let's go from the beginning. of Dune. The first 20 pages are an absolute chore. Words will be thrown at you. Weird people will be saying weird things. And I just feel like, what? Being just what? But just power through those first bits. And then the important words will become familiar to you. And the unimportant ones will fall away. I think it really does help to be a person who doesn't have to know every little thing. If you are like that, I suppose there is the index at the back if you want to read it. But I'm someone who can read a term and not be too bothered if I don't pick it up right away. I'm more interested in, right, ignore that then, we'll just keep going with the story. So I think that helped. But once you get into it, you just find that... See, I kind of kept joking when I was reading it that, you know, why was this known as this thing that's really hard to film? I get the big worms, they're kind of hard to film. But 90% of it is just people talking in rooms. Like, just people discussing things. What's hard to film about that? Throw in some helicopters every now and then and you've got what most of Dune is. Honestly, like, actually is way less action heavy than you would think. For some people that will be a bad thing. I'm sure some people will want to go in and be bored of these conversations, but I was really fascinated. For example, there's something that the film skipped, and I get why, but I found it a really interesting plot point about how one of the sort of side characters thinks that Jessica is a traitor. She obviously knows that she isn't, and so she's thinking, well, there's got to be a traitor somewhere, so where are they? So there's a little bit of that going on. And then there's also this scene where there's a garden in the palace. Is it a palace? But this garden, and I think that's a sort of a hint and a prelude of what might be to come for Arrakis. So why did they miss it out? Anyway, so there's a lot that I just found interesting. And even though I'm normally a character person, there weren't many characters that I really liked. But I think I really enjoyed having a mother-son journey happen, because I can't remember seeing that before in anything. No. So that really interested me, and that was great to see. So yeah, big surprise of the year. Yeah, so my advice, if you are any vaguely interested, power through those first 20-30 pages, and then the rest will come. Don't worry if you don't understand something, just keep on going. And then actually, once you pass that point, it is an easier read than you'd think. Number 6, My Dark Vanessa. My Dark Vanessa is a book that got a lot of chatter early last year, late year before. I think it was basically described as a Lolita story told from the point of view of the girl. So My Dark Vanessa is told from 2 timelines, the past and the present. So we are seeing a girl at 15 as she is seduced and falls into a relationship with her 40-something-year-old teacher. And then we see her in her mid-20s, I think. Late 20s, maybe. This was... I think this is so high on the list because it has such a huge impact. And it is so well written. But I never want to read the thing again. It's it's a book that will disturb you and traumatize you. And I think as well, for me, I have so much interest in mental health and understanding how people deal with trauma, that I found it fascinating that when we go to her as an adult, we're not necessarily, and this is a surprise to me, we're not necessarily going to a woman who is angry about what's happened, or she's a woman who doesn't recognize her own trauma. She still is sort of in denial and downplaying what happened. There were other people who, it turns out, went through a similar thing with this teacher, and who get in contact with her and say, oh, you should, join, and it's very much a book of the Me Too movement era. Telling her to join them, and she sort of doesn't want to. And that was, like, really sad and horrifying, but fascinating. I just wanted to shake her on the shoulders and say, hey, something terrible happened to you, and you sort of need to face that to heal. And that, it does come, sort of, but... And then you just jump back to her as a girl, and you're just seeing this whole thing happen. You're seeing the manipulation from this guy, and it's horrifying. And that's all I can say. Make sure you're in the right mindset and you can handle this when you go into it. It's definitely like a car crash. I couldn't look away. I had to keep going. Oh my god, that was rough. Okay, that's the dark corner's out of the way. I think we're pretty much okay from this point on. No other sneaky, depressing books coming in. At number 5 is the Hopkins manuscript. This is so far removed from Vanessa. Which is, I think, a great thing. Again, like I said, showing this list to me from however long ago, I think this would have been another surprise. So this year, spring of this year, we went to Bath for a bit of a holiday, and I discovered Persephone books. Now, Persephone books reprint or print out of print classic books. Yeah. So they find books that are currently out of print. They tend to focus on female authors from the UK, but they do branch out. This is actually written by a dude. Maybe I was betraying the Persephone book vibe by doing that. But this is also that only sci-fi book, but sci-fi is sci-fi how it was like 100 years ago. Not quite, it's not Dune yet. Pre-Dune sci-fi. So Hopkins' manuscript is about a quite well-off guy, lives in the UK, a bit posh. He likes breeding chickens and he's really proud of them. It's all very quaint and silly, and he joins an astronomy club. As it's that kind of era. He's posh, so he needs something to do that looks good to other people. But this club has a meeting in London where they are told that the moon is heading for the Earth. That's the setup. So they're told that they're not allowed to say anything because they could cause mass panic if they don't. So we have this period of time where he knows and no one else does. But there's these notices from the government that are about, we think there might be a war. So this is set in the 1930s. So we think there might be another war. We've got to prepare. We're going to make bunkers. So everyone thinks it's for the war, but he's very smug going, well, I know what this is about. But then he's a bit, what's the word? He's a bit upset when he's then not instantly given, like, important roles in the town. And he's like, how dare they not give me this role? Don't they know? I mean, obviously they don't know how amazing I am. And yeah, so that's the kind of character that he is. But it's just a bit silly and funny. So there's this, like, big disaster that's coming, but it's mostly amusing because you're just following this guy who is ridiculous. I don't really want to spoil where it goes, because the moon stuff is intriguing. So, minor spoiler, jump to this time if you don't want to spoil. So, the moon does hit, and so we go through this really weird moment, this sequence where he's in his house and he's blocked up all the windows, and then suddenly, like, the air is sucked out, but then it comes back. So somehow he survives, and, like, a couple of people do survive this. So what follows then is him living off what's in his pantry, and then he finds two young people that he knows, and invites them to live with him, and they become a sort of, like, little family for a bit. He amazingly finds one of his chickens and gets the chicken breeding going again, gets them laying eggs. So then it kind of follows this, like, post-apocalypse, quaint English village setting. Oh, it's really weird but fascinating. I love it. And then it also goes into the politics of it, because the moon has actually landed and is joining certain chunks of land. So then it becomes a case of, well, how do they split up? This is new land, how do we split it up amongst countries? So there's a lot to it towards the end. It was something, if you're in the mood for something really different and a bit weird but a bit silly and funny, this is it. Now, when I originally wrote this list, I had a manga here. 4 is Yotsuba. But manga, with how I'm tracking manga, especially with something like Yotsuba, is a bit weird. There's no arcs, it's more comic strippy. I've read a couple of volumes, I actually don't know where I stopped. But it was cute and sweet and adorable and slice of life. It's written by the guy who wrote Azuma Daioh. So if you know that, then you know exactly what you're getting. It's cute, it's funny, it's exactly what you need every so often, especially after something like My Dark Vanessa. But to make this a fully book list, feel free to swap in Aristotle and Dante. Aristotle and Dante discover the secrets of the universe. Oh boy, this is a really great character book. This is really sweet. 2 boys hanging out, becoming really good friends, and one of them is very aware that he's gay, and very aware that he is attracted to the friend. But the one whose perspective we're shown, who we're in, is a really great example of an unreliable narrator, because you could just see that he's in love with this guy, but he's just not understood the fact that he's gay yet. And even to the point where everyone around him can see it, and he can't yet. So it's sweet, but it's quite raw in places, and yeah, I really recommend it. Number 3, I always want to say on. It's not on. The House in the Cerulean Sea. Oh, my mouth cannot cope with that word. Cerulean. So again, this is another book that was very popular at some point in the year, or year before. Yeah, it must have been 2020 because I read it right at the start of the year. Read it as a buddy read. It's just so wholesome and cute. Yeah, so the setup of the book is there is a man who works for an agency that inspects adoption houses and schools for children with special gifts, special powers. So this is a world where people can be psychic, or they could be fairies or something. But he is tasked to go look at a adoption house out in a remote location, because turns out that one of the children is the son of Satan. And joining this child is a blob called Chauncey, who just wants to be like a hotel porter. There's a girl gnome who loves gardening, who has a beard. There is a teenager who turns into a little Pomeranian when he's scared. I feel like I'm missing someone else. No, I think that's it. And the book tries to tell the story of, you know, how the world treats people who are different. Oh, if only we can understand each other. And I know that there's some people who weren't fully satisfied with that, or who wanted more from the world building. But I didn't care. I think all of the... You know, this is a book that made me laugh out loud, which happens so rarely that I have to take note of that. And it's so... It just made me so happy every time I read it, and every time any of the children are in a scene. And then add to that this romance that happens at the centre of it, and it's... I'll just keep saying it, it's wholesome and adorable, and just sometimes you need to be happy when you read a book, especially when you've had Dark Vanessa on your list. You know, sometimes you need that. I guess it didn't work for everybody, but it absolutely worked for me. I thought it was cute. I loved them. And I have read TJ Klune's next book, which is very similar, very wholesome. I don't think it was as cute, because I really miss the kids, because the kids were my favourite bit. Chauncey must be protected at all costs. But I'll be keeping an eye on him. I think he seems to be the author now that if I just need a little bit of a lift and something that's going to make me a little bit happy, I think he might... Well, having said that, the end of the last one did make me cry. So maybe not, but I'll be keeping an eye on him, definitely. Number 2, Breasts and Eggs. I've really gone into my Japanese fiction this year. I'm basically a weeb. I love Japan. I've been a couple times. I love a lot of things about the culture and stuff, so it made sense to check out some Japanese books. Even if they end up naff, the way I see it, in a year where I literally cannot enter that country, I get to sort of visit it in my mind through books. But I found some really great books this way. This is an example. This was a complete gamble. I sort of picked it up to challenge myself because reading the description would not be what I'd normally go for. But I think that's been a trend this year. There's some familiar stuff, there's fantasy in there. Yeah, that's absolutely what I'd go for. There's been funny and cute stuff, yep, that's also my go-to as well. But yeah, there's been some absolute surprises, and this is it. It's a funny book in that it's actually too smushed together, because the original Breast and Eggs was a novella. And then that did so well that a few years later, the writer came back to it and she added on an extra book. So this is those two together. I don't think that takes anything away, but it's something to be aware of, that the sort of setup that you're reading on the back isn't the whole thing. So for the novella portion, we are following... Oh, what's her name? So, Natsuko. So, our main character is Natsuko. She's a woman in her 30s, and her older sister, who's in her 40s, Makiko. She comes to visit with her daughter. So, the sister is obsessed with the idea of getting a boob job. And the daughter is going through a phase where she will not talk to the mother. She will talk to other people at school. At school, she's fine. But she won't talk to the mother. And during the visit, this seems to extend to Natsuko as well. Yeah, Natsuko. It extends to her as well. So during the time where she's there, she doesn't say anything at all. But we get these chapters that are her letters. So we get things from her perspective as well. And the whole thing is just an interesting character study. And again, that's another phrase that comes up a lot in this video. But that's exactly what this is. The older sister, she's quite off-putting in the way that she is obsessed with this stuff and this cosmetic surgery. Like, she brings leaflets and pamphlets. But it's clearly due to the fact that she is in a job, so I think she runs a bar or runs a hostess bar or something like that, and so it's clearly a job where she would have done well when she was younger, because she would be naturally pretty and all of the patrons would like her, blah blah, but now she's in her 40s and she's losing that sort of youthful beauty, so this is clearly her way of maybe getting something back. And that is probably the reason why the daughter isn't speaking. I won't say more than that. But getting to see from the daughter's perspective as well is really great, because we get to see the issues that affect teenagers. So you're getting sort of two sides of it. And I don't think there's anything else to say on that side. So the other portion, the other book, the sister and daughter have gone back to Osaka. This is quite a few years later as well, so the daughter is basically grown up at this point. But they're mostly out of the picture, so this centers around Natsuko and her realization that she wants a baby. So she is now in her 40s. She wants a baby. But she has no partner, and she's not really interested in having a partner. And more than that, she doesn't really want to have sex. So she then starts this journey of thinking, well, how do I get one? Is artificial insemination an option? She starts going to seminars, she starts talking to people, and really it's just a book of conversations. And I didn't realise this was something I needed, because it's a lot of conversations about women and expectations on women and the things that they go through. And I think I really needed that. And I think I especially needed it during a time where I wasn't getting to see friends to speak to them. So getting to be part of these conversations centering around women was great. It was fantastic, and it's so simple, but it really does pull you in. And there's not much more I can say but that. Because really the plot and the ending are not really that important. It really is just seeing her sort of like maneuver this concept and dealing with people who have been through it or who are against it sometimes. So for example, she ends up speaking to someone who he himself was a baby of artificial insemination. And so it also looks at the ideas of what it means to grow up not knowing who your biological dad is, and whether that means that something's missing or is it actually fine. So yeah, a lot of really interesting discussions, and I really liked it. And yeah, she's going to be a writer to watch. She did have a book come out this year that I picked up in Bath called Heaven, but that book is definitely on the heavy side. So accepting that, I'm hoping the one after that is closer to Breast and Eggs than to Heaven, because yeah, Heaven was just a little bit too heavy for me. But yeah, a writer to watch, definitely. So we've done our non-fiction, we've done our interesting things, we've seen New Horizons. It's been a fantastic reading year. But I am still me. I am still a big old fantasy nerd, so top of the list. I'm actually going to do a joint. I've not brought up the other one. So Rhythm of War and Oathbringer. To me, I feel like they're part of the same series. They're so similar, and I read them back to back, essentially. So to me, these are blurred together. I think no matter which Stormlight book fell into the year, it would have this spot for me. I was new to Brandon Sanderson. Stormlight Archive was my first, and oh my god, reading these books has brought back so much joy in reading for me. Honestly, Way of Kings, I had not felt that way reading a book in a very long time, maybe since I was a teenager. I wanted to know what was happening, I wanted to know this world, I fell in love with these characters. And he also has a way of writing action sequences where you can see them so clearly in your head. You know, it's such an impressive skill, and I actually don't think it gets spoken about enough. I know people say, oh, he has these, there's this term called, is it like a Sanderson lunch? I'm totally forgetting what the word is. But people have a phrase because he has these like really bombastic endings. But an element to that, especially in the first couple of books, I know they're not technically on my list, but bear with me. These endings have these huge battles, but I can see them as clearly as I'm watching a film. And I don't really know how he does that, because there's so many times where you read a book and there's an action sequence, you can't quite picture it. Like, suddenly the author will use a phrase and go, oh, they came at them from above, and you're like, oh, I thought they were like next to them or behind, and like positioning is a thing, but he makes it absolutely clear. And So you have these action sequences that are really vibrant, huge mix of characters, interesting magic system, and huge worlds where the world building, I love it. Some people so there's these intervals between the big parts of each book, and the intervals will like jump to mostly characters we don't know in random locations that don't seem to have anything to do with the main plot. I really like them because I'm really interested to know more about this world and the different countries in this world and how the different peoples are. So I don't care, I'm happy. So maybe I should talk more specifically about Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. Oathbringer really focuses... So I find each book really gives a lot more time to one of the characters than the rest, or at least in the backstory of that character. So we got to see more about Dalinar and see his progression as a character. And that was absolutely fascinating. And you believe it as well. You can... How this guy goes from... like a very straight military person who will do some very brutal things. But how he can become a king-like figure who's very empathetic and this is just one character. How he can become really empathetic and really care about not just his country, but actually the state of the whole world. Oh god, no, I'm running out of battery, so I will try to wrap this up really quickly. There's plenty of people out there who talk about Brandon Sanderson, but that he's on my list. I think the first two books were my favourites, but Oathbringer and Rhythm War, there's so much that I enjoyed. I think he has a way of giving time to characters that maybe didn't get enough time before. Yeah, I really like it. It's good. It's great. It's fantastic. Yeah, I don't know if I can say much more because really I could spend hours talking about these books. I mean, they're all this big, so it'll take you a while to get through them. But I love them and I can't wait for more. I'm just really sad that I now have to wait for the next one, like everybody else. And there we have it. That's my top 10 of the year. If you're interested in any of the books, I'll listen down below. And hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye!
Lucille had gone over 25 times with Buster, and on a few occasions had one cutest couple. As one entered sexual maturity and the other one left it, it became harder to win.
So hot.
If you were hot, Mother, we would win.
It's not just Mother Boy, it's Mother Boy 30.